At URI's Harrington School of Communication and Media, every day is an exploration.
With global learning opportunities
and high-profile internships,
Harrington prepares us to be critical media consumers
and creative media producers
in the rapidly changing 21st century marketplace.
In strategic communications,
in multimedia journalism,
in sports media,
in writing and rhetoric,
in information analytics,
in digital media, film, and TV.
Our tight-knit learning community is tailored to build a solid foundation
for powerful creative communication
and a lifetime of achievement and opportunity,
wherever our passions lead. Discovery, opportunity, impact.
The Harrington School of Communication and Media at the University of Rhode Island.
Visit today.
Greetings, everyone. Even though I can't see you, I think you can all see me. I'm Amina Kotari, Director of Harrington School of Communication and Media. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in person, and those of you who are online for the 16th Annual Amanpour Lecture. We have a truly remarkable program in store for you tonight with our featured speaker, Mstyslav Chernov, who actually got a Pulitzer for 20 Days in Maripol last night. So it's an honor to invite him to campus today. I also want to recognize our president, our provost is here, and Christiane Amanpour, who has endowed the lecture as well. I'd like to start by thanking Christiane for her steadfast support for the university and this lecture series. Her support enables us to bring some of the finest journalists in the world to URI. These lectures are incredible learning experiences for our students, as well as a chance for the greater URI community to hear from people around the world who are covering the important stories. We're thrilled to have Christiane with us here tonight, and you'll be hearing from her in a few minutes. Also with us tonight is our president, Mark Bolange. President Bolange came to URI 2021 and has been working to make sure that Rhode Island's flagship university continues to flourish and to make an impact on our state and beyond. The State of Union was earlier this month, and he shared some of the highlights from that. His 10-year strategic plan, Focus URI, sets a bold agenda for the university. It includes in the plan 4 strategic priorities: broaden university's impact, enhance student achievements, foster an inclusive culture, empower the university of the future. And Harrington School is excited to contribute to this initiative and be a partner in this vision. We are already seeing the vision come together in the form of increased state funding for the first time in the last 50 years, a substantial increase in research funding last year, and new infrastructure projects like improvement to URI's Bay campus, and a beautiful fine arts center coming soon. And we look forward to seeing this momentum build in the years to come. Now, please join me in welcoming the 12th president of the University of Rhode Island, Mark Bolange.
Thank you, Amina. So good to see all of you this evening. I would like to begin with our land acknowledgement. The University of Rhode Island occupies the traditional stomping ground of the Narragansett Nation and the Niantic people. We honor and respect the enduring and continuing relationship between the indigenous people in this land by teaching and learning more about their history and present-day communities, and by becoming stewards of the land we, too, inhabit. I'd also like to formally welcome you all here this evening. I know there are also members of the Board of Trustees, including our Chair of the Board of Trustees, Margot Cook. So thank you for joining us here. We are so fortunate to have Christiane Amanpour as an esteemed URI alum who gives so generously of her time, her talent, and her expertise, not only to URI, but to the world. Now more than ever, it is so important that we recognize and celebrate the incredible work that journalists are doing. Today, we are seeing difficult images and hearing heartbreaking stories unfolding in real time across the nation and around the world. And I have to say, I have seen the impact of these stories on our students and our community members, particularly this past week. And as hard as it is also important to remember our interconnections of our humanity and of our need to understand and engage with the world around us in meaningful ways. Here at URI, it has become even more important to ensure that our community members have a safe space to be heard, to come together, and to have important and sometimes difficult conversations. And I credit the writers, photographers, reporters, videographers who, often risking their lives, bring us the moving images and powerful words that help guide these conversations and connect us to the stories happening outside of Kingston and far beyond Rhode Island. Which is why we are here this evening, to celebrate and to learn from those who tell the stories. Christiane Amanpour has been an award-winning trailblazer in her reporting, a leading global journalist, and a mentor and an inspiration to so many. After graduating from the University of Rhode Island, she began her career as a journalist at CNN, as an entry-level assistant on the network's international assignment desk in Atlanta. 4 decades later, and through her combined 10 years at CNN and ABC News, she has fundamentally changed the face of global journalism. She has interviewed major world leaders from Iranian presidents, the presidents of Afghanistan and Sudan, and from prime ministers of Israel and presidents of the Palestinian Authority, to Muammar Gaddafi and Hosni Mubarak during the Arab Spring. She has thoughtfully and fearlessly brought world events into the homes of millions, which has earned her every major television journalism award, including an inaugural Television Academy honor, 14 News and Documentary Emmy Awards, 4 George Foster Peabody Awards, 2 George Polk Awards, 3 DuPont Columbia Awards, the Courage in Journalism Award, an Edward Murrow Award, and a Giants of Broadcasting honor from the Library of American Broadcasting. To say that we are fortunate to have this lecture series named in her honor would be an understatement. Today, the Amanpour Lecture is a critical platform at URI for learning, discussion, inspiration, and promotion of ethical journalism. The series plays an important role in the student experience for our aspiring journalists and faculty scholars, and it allows broader audiences to engage with and discover the complexities of the job of today's journalists. So I am pleased to offer my sincere thanks on behalf of the entire university for Christiane's contributions to URI and the world. And I ask you to please join me in welcoming her this evening.
Christiane, before you speak, I have something for you.
Yes.
This is from, hold on. This is from Harrington School of Communication and Media in appreciation for all the work that Christiane does for journalism, but also for inspiring the next generation of journalists. Thank you.
Thank you, Amina. Thank you, President Parlage. I'll tell you what this is. It's a beautiful document with all the names of all the journalists who've come and spoken here to you and to this community since it first started in 2008. And Mstyslav Chernov is the latest one. Thank you. Okay. All right. So it's my great pleasure to be back here in Rhode Island, which I call my home state. I really got a great start in my career by being a journalism student here and by taking a whole load of liberal arts and other lectures and classes and really getting to know America and the history of America, political science, philosophy, and all the incredibly important, including literature. I learned more about Shakespeare here than I did when I was at high school in England. You had a fabulous, I mean, he was a really elderly gentleman whose name has literally just slipped off the tip of my tongue, but was a legendary Shakespeare scholar. And I remember, you know, having just the most fantastic time here, learning, you know, how to be a practical journalist. And then actually, President Parlage, my very first job was at WJAR here in Rhode Island, in Providence. And yes, and I don't know whether Laurie White is still here, but her wonderful late husband was Jim Terracani, who was my mentor here at WJAR, and I was his intern for a while during my studies here. Then when I left, I became an electronics graphics operator. That basically means these words. That's what I was doing in the back and in the control room at WJAR. And from there, they said, oh, you know what? There's this thing called CNN that just started, and you want to be a foreign correspondent. You've got a foreign accent, and we've heard foreign accents there. So why don't you try? So from my desk at JAR, I called the HR, at, as it so was back then, at CNN, and I got a job. And I went down there, and 40 years later, I'm still at CNN. I've had the opportunity to meet a lot of incredible journalists, my colleagues, people who went before me, people who were alongside me, and people who've come up since. And it's been great to invite many of them here to speak to the community, who I know many of you are from the local community, and there are students also who are hopefully looking online. But I have been so impressed by so many of these great journalists who come from around the world to give you firsthand their experience as eyewitnesses of some of the most important global events that are happening. And tonight's speaker, Mstyslav Chernov, is one of them. He is a young man who started off his career as a photographer. He worked for AP, amongst others. And then he became, and he is now, a director and I'm going to say cinematographer. He might say director of photography, cameraman, I don't know. But he is a cinematographer. And his film, 20 Days in Mariupol, I'm just going to tell you, I have never seen a war film like that. It is truly remarkable. It is so human, it's so humane, and it really takes you inside this unbelievable siege in the middle of, you know, 2023, well, 2022 at the time. And you just can't even, seriously, you can't even understand how that kind of savagery could have been meted out against neighbors, you know, Russians against Ukrainians. But that's not really the point of the documentary. It's not a diatribe. It's not a lecture, so to speak. It is a hugely compassionate eyewitness companion to the people there. It's as if Mstyslav was with them for those 20 days, and along the way in the documentary over those 20 days, you hear people in Mariupol essentially being so grateful that he and his team are there, that they can get this terrible story out of this siege and the violation of international law and human rights and the shelling of even hospitals and women and children. And it is a tragedy, but it is also done in such a compelling and accessible way that you just feel like you know the residents of Mariupol having watched this, and you appreciate their bravery. And, you know, many television and film journalists today often put themselves in the center of the film or of the story. And this is not the case. Apart from a few shots of maybe the helmet that some of the press wear, or, you know, it's written press, you can tell that there's journalists. But he's not the center of the story, and yet he is, because he's telling the story. And English is not his first language, but he speaks brilliantly. But not only that, he's written a phenomenal script whereby he recounts what he's seeing without melodrama and without putting himself as the center of this. It's always the people and the city. And it is truly, I think, one of the most accomplished of the modern, well, of all time. I really think, I mean, I've seen a lot, not only covering war, but of all the fabulous films and documentaries that have been made. But this one is exceptional in the way he chose to do it, and he will tell you a lot more about it. So I'm very pleased to introduce Mstyslav Chernov. Thank you.
I don't see any of you. Okay. How can we have a conversation? This is very surreal for me. 2 days ago, well, like 25 hours, 30 hours ago, I was trying to get across Dnipro River with the Ukrainian special forces. And we got into the boat. It was foggy, and the boat just went across the river, and I heard these explosions and machine guns shooting, and you couldn't see anything in front of you. You just go there. And here I am now here. And it took me a while to drive back to Kiev, then to Warsaw, then to fly to Frankfurt, to New York, get a Pulitzer Prize. and then my colleagues were like, "Why are you not wearing a tie?" It is very surreal, and it's everything I was dreaming for all my career as a photographer, as a videographer, as a journalist, which has started unplanned. I've graduated from Kharkiv University of Radio Electronics. I'm a major in computer sciences, so nothing to do with journalism, but I get so incredibly bored by the 5th year of the university that I became a journalist. I got invited to a hospital just to create a local network for the internet. And one day the doctor runs in the room and says, "Hey, technician, can you use the camera?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." So he gives me the camera, drags me to a surgery room, and there is a patient, and they did a unique operation back then for them, transplantation. I took a picture, and that was the moment when I knew I wanted to be a photographer, a documentary photographer. And that happened to a lot of, that's the common story for a lot of Ukrainian journalists, for generally a lot of conflict journalists in the world. We didn't study for that. And most of the conflict journalists I know, the whole generations of conflict photographers and journalists became such because war came to their country. Because if you're a journalist, if you're a documentarian in a country that is at war, what can you do? You become a war correspondent. And so the team that got the Pulitzer Prize with me consists of 4 people. It's a Pulitzer Prize for public service, and 2 of us are have been on the front lines for 9 years. There is one very young, almost a student, field producer, local journalist, and an investigator, Laura Hinand, investigator, and we were sitting at the Columbia University, and she said, Mstyslav, she's well-seasoned journalist. She said, Mstyslav, just a week ago, I finished paying my loan on the university. And here I am getting the Pulitzer Prize. So we are all very different. We're all very different. And our work in Mariupol, beginning of the war, beginning of the full-scale invasion, 24th of February 2022, it became quite clear that Russia is going to attack Ukraine in one way or another. There's going to be escalation. And we were sitting in Bakhmut, which doesn't exist anymore as a city, as well as many other cities in Ukraine, which are being attacked and bombed. And I remember, half jokingly, we were saying, so where do we meet the Third World War? I hope we were wrong. I really hope so. I guess it's up to all of us for that not to be true in some way. But we went to Mariupol because that seemed to be a main target for Russia at that point, a strategic target. And we stayed there in a siege for 20 days without connection, without food and water, barely surviving with the residents of the city. And well, the most challenging part was to keep shooting at the same time and to keep sending this to our editors in London, in New York, in Kiev. And we managed to leave, but many people didn't. Thousands of people have died. And we managed to get out and take all the footage, all the photos with us. And that resulted in a film, 20 Days in Mariupol, a film that will be aired on PBS on 21st of November. I invite you all to see it. If some of you have probably seen it here, but those who haven't, please watch it. It was nominated from Ukraine for the Oscars this year to represent the country. And I think it's quite interesting that the country picks a documentary to represent itself. It's probably necessary during the war. I'm going to show you the trailer for it, a bit of it, and then I'm probably going to go back a little bit to show you how it all went for me. How did I end up from being a bored student to speak in front of you?
Someone once told me, wars don't start with explosions. They start with silence.
Лично видим визуально. Танки зашли с надписью Z.
Город Мариуполь блокирован со всех сторон.
Russians have entered the city. The war has begun, and we have to tell its story.
Хорошо, что тут есть пресса. Снимайте.
This is painful to watch, but it must be painful to watch.
Вони нанесли бомбовий удар. Вон там! Хирургический корпус! Вот там! А, вы госпитале, да? Мамочка! Не знаешь, куда бежать.
Чего расстраиваешься?
Я не хочу, чтобы я умирала.
Депутаты вам разошлись. Женщина ногом ладила.
Они столько пережили с мамами.
If the world saw everything that happened in Mariupol, it would give at least some meaning to this horror. My brain will desperately want to forget all this, but the camera will not let it happen.
So just one more clip from the film, just to get you a little bit more in the context. This is probably something you definitely saw on a TV. Everything actually that you saw from Mariupol was filmed by us. This particular piece is quite significant. I would say it's a climax of what happened in Mariupol. I'll come back. Can we get the sound a little bit up?
The shockwave. Ears and skin feel the change of pressure. We hide in the entryway of a building and wait for another strike, praying it will not hit us.
Да куда он сбросил?
Туда. А что там?
We go to the top of the building and see the smoke just a few blocks away. It's a hospital.
Хирургический корпус, вот там, от двухэтажное здание, где родильное раньше было. Быстрее! Вот там, аж туда едьте, быстрее, там гинеколог ждет.
Все хорошо. Куда сходить? Минут идем. Вы глушите, да? Все нормально, все хорошо. А где на блядь, я не знаю. Куда вы хотите? Вопрос только в вам. Куда? Выявили, куда дальше? Куда садиться? Машины не целые!
Девочка, потихоньку, мама ждет.
Заходите.
Тихо, спокойно. Без паники, без паники. Осторожно. Вниз. Без паники.
Выше, поднимите. Маму дай, куда несем? Держи сюда. Давай.
So what is interesting that I'm kind of keep reliving this deja vu of hospitals being bombed and misinformation that is going around these bombings. And immediately after this happened, already while filming it, I was looking at the scene, and I knew that this is gonna bring in the storm of misinformation, of different versions of arguments. And we were, back then, we were stuck inside the city. We couldn't really see the impact of that. But Russia, after this footage was published, Russia quickly called us information terrorists, and our names were on the blacklist. And starting from there, getting out of the city unnoticed was quite hard. But I remember a policeman who was with us was helping to find connection or electricity, and he told me, Mstyslav, this is gonna stop the war. Everybody's gonna see that, and that's it. And of course, it didn't. It reminded me about another case of another attack that happened in the very beginning of my career. I'm going to show it to you later. Beginning of my career as a conflict journalist in 2014, Russia shut down MH17 plane over Donbass, and I was one of the first international journalists who was on the spot, and I didn't know anything about war reporting back then. It was the second day of me filming at all. Like, I was a photographer, but 2 days before that, I had my friend, now he's my friend, back then he was just a colleague, saying, Mstyslav, I have to leave, can you film? And I was like, I have a button here on my camera with a record. Sure, I can film. And he said, yeah, it's very simple. For AP, it's quite simple. You know, make 30 shots, 2 interviews, use the tripod. Here's the shot list. Okay, bye. And he left. And then this happens, that airplane is shot down. And for those who were there at that point, read all the social media reports and followed what was going on, it was quite clear at that moment that Russia shut it down. Now it's proven by the court, as it should be. But back then, it was just clear to us. So we went there, and it was the most horrifying experience. Sorry, I will be talking about some bad experiences, but that's the reality of the world we live in right now. We cannot turn away from it. That was the most single horrifying experience in my life, when you just drive and try not to drive on the body parts, and you see children tied to their chairs from the airplane just out in the field, and as you walk towards the burning, what remains of the burning plane, you just understand that you're walking on the bones. None of that made it to news because it was so graphic, because it was so difficult. It's still in my archives. A lot of footage did, and it went to like 1,700 channels, and I thought, okay, it's gonna stop the war. That's it. We're gonna be a ceasefire, and everybody will sit down and discuss what this shouldn't have been done. Everybody will get involved now. And what didn't happen? Here we are. And moreover, next day, I've seen this footage in Russian channels, in Ukrainian channels, US channels, and Chinese channels, and European channels, all saying different things. Quite opposite, actually. So that was the moment of my disillusion in... I was quite disillusioned by journalism at that point. So I called up the guy who left me there. He was Serbian. And I said, man, what do I do? How do I process this? Can we even change anything? Can we influence anything? Is there any point in what we do? And he said, hey, Mstyslav, you know, I was through Balkan Wars and Srebrenica and all the terrible places. We just had a conversation about that. And he said, I'm there. He was Serbian, so he was going in with the Serbian troops. So he's there, and an arrested man, runs to him, to the camera, and he grabs the camera and says, please film me, film my face. You see my face? Film it. Because that man knew that if the camera was there, he wouldn't be killed. Well, that man survived. Many didn't. Thousands didn't. However, that's what he told me. So he said, keep filming. It might make a difference. You just don't know yet. And it is very hard to judge, even after 2 years, what exactly has changed. This footage or that footage, what can we change? But I guess not having journalists at all, not having independent journalists at all in the places where the human rights are violated, where there are possible war crimes, make it just impossible for the future generations to understand what happened. And it's impossible for the courts to understand what happened. But it all started very different. I just want to show you my city. It's Kharkiv, where I was born, also heavily bombed afterwards, but I've started with a very peaceful photography, documentary, and I thought that's going to be what I do in life after the boring university. And then I left Ukraine because news got repeated over and over, and I started traveling. I started working not as a photographer. This was the first time I got disillusioned by photography, and I thought, okay, I'm not going to work as a photographer anymore. To hell with it. Started traveling, learning languages, still taking photos, kind of getting the photography back. It was a good time. I really miss it. So I made some money working in different places, traveling, and I went back to Ukraine and I started looking for a job. Again, I hoped for being documentarian. That's more a story for the students. And I was so desperate, I couldn't get any job. Then I decided to just to go and spend all my money for building the portfolio. That's another lesson. You have to build your portfolio before you do any serious work. So everything that has been done now is done through years and years of seemingly irrelevant experiences, but they all serve when it's time. So I went to Far East, Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, and I started shooting for small NGOs. And I was trying to sell or to get assignments, failed completely. Couldn't sell any photos, couldn't convince anyone to take the stories. Again, I was desperate. I decided to leave photography again, although I came back to Ukraine, shot several more series of photos about the healthcare, and I had a wonderful teacher, very grumpy guy, who never liked even one photo that was showed to him. And I remember I came to him and said, "Look, I've shot this series of photos about the children, about the surgeries, and I think they're amazing. Could you comment on that?" And he looked through them. He said, "Mstyslav, how long did you spend for shooting these photos?" I was so proud. I said, "A week. In a week, I shot so many good photos." And he said, "Come back to me after 7 years of shooting this." Oof. I did. He was dead. He died. Sorry, but I kept shooting. I got his advice. But I remember this another. He had an amazing technique. I still remember this. So whenever students come to me and say, how do how do we study? Give us homework. He used to give a homework to the class, a photography class, and that homework did not include making even one photo. He said, Mstyslav, imagine two men fighting in the mud. Or maybe they're hugging, doesn't matter. And go and next time come with ideas for 9 more photographs in this story. And everyone in this class would come back with ideas. And that's what I knew, that the photography and videography is actually a literature. So I kept shooting, but again, much later, yeah, got desperate again. I thought never gonna come back to photography again. And then something special happened, something that changed my life again. I was in Turkey, and I was there just on a vacation. One day I went out on the square, and I found out that there were protests. There were fights with the police, gas. There was a police car burning in the middle of the square, and I went there. I took several photographs, and I felt something I've never felt before. I felt that this is the single most surreal experience I had in my life, but at the same time, most real one. And as further I progressed in my life, further the theme of misinformation, misinterpretations are coming to us through the screens, through the TV, through our phones, became relevant. I understood that the only way I can understand what is really happening to the world is by being there, actually going there, witnessing it myself, shooting it myself. This was the only way to overcome the noise. This was the only way to make any sense of the world I lived in. And I guess this is something that will become more and more relevant in the future, because we will be just overwhelmed by these waves of the information, the chaos, and there will be less and less sense in it. So yeah, I kept shooting. That's the car. And then the revolution started in Ukraine. And yeah, that's the revolution. And that's it. We all became revolutionary photographers, then war photographers and videographers. Nobody was buying my pictures at this point too. There were so many times, I cannot even tell you, there were so many times when my girlfriend and my wife told me, you have to leave this. I told myself, this is it, I cannot do this anymore. My friends became IT specialists, and I kept shooting anyway. That's actually Mariupol in 2014. And that's the war started. That's the war started. Showing you photos, there were many videos, but it's kind of easier to go with the photos. Oh, that's the video actually. That's the MH17 crash. Moderated footage. Still quite hard. And so I went. AP hired me, sent me to different wars in Iraq. That's Ukraine. Migrant crisis started in Europe. I kept coming back to Ukraine. It was harder and harder all these years. It was harder and harder to to convince editors to take the stories. They were telling me, naturally, Mstyslav, you're working for news, and there's nothing new in that war. So either find new perspective or don't shoot it. And I think partially the reason that 2022 invasion in Ukraine was possible and was so unexpected is because we as journalists didn't do a proper job over those years, showing the world that it was invasion and it was going on, and that's Iraq. And I thought it's the hardest experience I've ever had. Suicide bombers, ISIS. I'm not giving you a sound because I could just talk over. So you see this path, that's Karabakh. Very interesting. It got dozens of messages on the social media when I published this, that I have brought this rocket there and I've placed it there. Belarus. That's me getting arrested and beaten up. I got beaten up so many times. I can give you specifics of beaten up of every single police force in Europe. They have their own specialty, but the Belarusian was hard. You know, the usually European police that beats you up and just keeps running and arresting protesters or just dispersing the crowd. But the Belarusian police beats you up and then they arrest you. That was something unexpected. I usually just get beaten up. And then the COVID came, of course. COVID came for all of us. And then I remember saying to editors, I need to go to Ukraine. I need to report from the front lines. And they were like, no, it's COVID time. And I said, I'm going to shoot the COVID on the front line. Don't worry. So I'm getting in these trenches, and the soldiers are fighting. There's like 30 meters contact there with the machine guns shooting from the trench. And I'm filming them, and I'm like, what do you think about COVID pandemic? And they're like, I'm a little bit busy now. I cannot think about it. But it worked as a story. Ukraine was actually quite underreported, and it hit very, very hard. And then it was Afghanistan, of course. Afghanistan, the US forces retreated, and we went in on foot, crossed the border from Pakistan and started shooting how the Taliban was establishing the government, or how they were managing everything. And that seemed to be the most important story of the year. And I remember when I was finishing, I spent like half year in Afghanistan, and I remember flying from there directly to Ukraine in January 2022, and I was thinking, I was just filming these kids dying from suffering from malnutrition, dying from hunger, parents selling their daughters to rich Iranians for the marriage. And I was thinking, oh my God, if now Russia attacks Ukraine, everybody will forget about it. No one will care. And that is actually what happened, unfortunately. And then Ukraine, Ukraine started, and that was overwhelming, and that's Mariupol. You know, I think one of the hardest things that happened in Mariupol, apart of the fact that probably more than 25,000 people died, and the amount of possible war crimes is just unimaginable. If we know about hundreds of war crimes in Bucha, then we're talking about thousands of possible war crimes in Mariupol, which will never be investigated because there is no access to victims, there is no access to the place where the crime happened. But another thing which I think is very symbolic for Mariupol is that Mariupol was in an information siege as well, not only in a military siege. And that led to complete collapse of the society, you know? I have been hiding in a hospital, filming in a hospital for a couple of days, and then I went out on the streets, and by that time there was no connection at all. So people didn't know if Ukraine still existed. People didn't know if what happened to the cities nearby. And there was still enough food and water. There was still, the bombs didn't fall in the middle of the city, not so chaotically. And yet the society collapsed completely. People started looting, they started fighting each other. Hell, they were running after me when I tried to film this. But not all. There were amazing people that helped each other, and that's what I think is amazing, that the war gets good people to be better and bad people to be worse. It just gets you your real self. But back to the point, that showed me that information and journalism is sometimes more vital for our modern society that is dependent on information than food and water. That is something that holds us all together. And in the times when journalism is largely disregarded, even in the democratic countries, it loses trust. It's important to understand how actually important it is. That's Mariupol, yeah. Bucha, and I went back to Kharkiv, my hometown. That was devastating. This is my house where I lived as a student for 5 years. I used to get out of this house, get a coffee just around the corner, and get a subway to university. Yeah, that's us crossing the river. Yeah, so I wish I had more time, but we have time for questions anyway. So I'm here for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mstyslav, for a wonderful presentation and your fearless reporting. I would like to now invite our audience members to ask some questions. We already have received some from the screening of the phone. And to expedite the conversation, we invite anyone who would like to ask a question to come to the left side. There should be a table there with index cards. So if you could write the questions there. We will pick some in interest of time, and we have people also joining us virtually, and they can send the questions in too. So we'll try and answer some questions from the virtual audience as well as some in the room. So please, if you'd like to ask a question, please come to the left side. There is the index cards and some pens for you to write them, okay? And while Mstyslav and I will join you on the hot seat there.
Ooh.
These are not the most comfortable seats, so I need to settle in properly.
What? This is director's seat.
I know. You are used to them, not me.
No, I've never been in one, but I'm happy to finally be in one. Oh yeah. One of the versions in the Russian news that they were saying that AP has brought Hollywood production to Mariupol and made a film. So yeah, that's.
So it is fitting that we are sitting in the director's seat.
Hollywood chair, great.
So while the questions are coming, I actually would like to follow up on something we discussed this afternoon, and which is not often talked about, right? This reporting from Ukraine is personal for you, that's your home, but also you've been working for Associated Press since 2014, and you've covered many wars. So for our audience, but also for our students, particularly in a time when journalism is not regarded as valuable as it should, if you could talk a little bit about what is the professional and the personal cost, right, of reporting and working as a war journalist.
The personal cost, well, is immense. But then again, I mean, it destroys your family. It takes it away from you. You lose friends inevitably. I had a friend who was killed in a forest near Kiev. He was just shot in the head. A photographer, and he used to say, Mstyslav, every war photographer dreams to make a photo which will stop the war. No one did it, but you know, probably yes, we all dream about that. But I guess that's not the mission. The mission is not to stop the war. So as long, answering your question, as long as you're not thinking of your work as a mission, then you have much more realistic expectations on what you can do or what you can't do. And I think it is actually quite dangerous for conflict journalists, for journalists who work a lot with the human rights violations, with potential war crimes. It is quite dangerous for journalists to feel that they are on some kind of mission, because that could just move your moral compass in the wrong way, or at least, yeah. So it seems that it's okay, actually, right? It seems that the moral compass is always there, and it's universal for all humans. But I remember my editors kept telling me, Mstyslav, keep your emotions separate from your coverage, because as soon as you become an activist, as soon as you stop being a journalist and become an activist, the trust in what you do will disappear. And propaganda, whatever this propaganda is, will use that to undermine the reporting that you do. So more activist you are, less trustworthy your reporting is when it is about war crimes, when it is about human rights violations. It's kind of a sacrifice you have to do, to just step back and try to being closer to judicial system even than to activists. It might seem counterintuitive, and for me it is counterintuitive because I'm Ukrainian and you know the war is there. But it really helps to keep the focus and the trust.
So was it harder for you when covering Ukraine compared to other places?
Much harder, much harder. It's much harder to separate emotions from the coverage. And obviously, every single human deserves an equal attention, and the suffering of every single human deserves equal attention and care and attention. But But when the shell hits your house, when your city gets occupied, like the city of Evgeny Maloletko, the photographer who was with me, it's occupied now. That is hard not to feel the emotions. And then this was a part of a challenge when we were making a film. It's 95 minutes of something tearing your heart apart. And the first narration I did for the film was way too emotional. And I also felt that that means that I am imposing my own emotions on the audience, or on the viewers. And that is the wrong thing to do. Then it became too cold. I made it again. It became too cold, too distant. So ultimately, we found the right tone, the tone of just a conversation, as if me and you would sit down here and I tell you a story. I tell you a story of people who lost their homes, who lost their families, their lives. And that's probably the tone that journalism should adopt more in general. This conversation.
So it was it a pragmatic decision for you to be part of the film, but not be visually present, to have a voice, and to narrate the experience? So can you talk about how the decision making behind that came about?
Yeah, so those who haven't seen the film is narrated by me, and it's narrated from a perspective of a journalist, obviously. However, there is very little of any visuals of me or the team. That is because we really didn't want to take any attention from people whose stories we're telling and pull it to us, to the authors. At the same time, the journalism in general is the theme of the film, so journalistic perspective is something that helps to tell the story. And yeah, we are part of the community. We are part of the community we're telling the stories about. And I think there's a good trend, a generally good trend in the world journalism to give more trust and more agency to local journalists rather than just people coming, just parachuting down, telling the story and leaving. But then again, it brings some problems. Some journalists still cannot be neutral, and that creates trust issues. This is all quite, we have to, I feel like we are in a stage where we have to, like a moment of history where we have to kind of start thinking about reinventing the role of journalism, or just like rethinking, because so much got radicalized from one side, but at the same time, so much got just indifferent. So many people are indifferent, they don't really care, they just shield themselves from journalism, from any information, and that creates an opportunity for radicals to take over the informational agenda, to take over like the information space, and worsen the situation even more. So we have to understand where the journalism stands in that equation, where the journalism has to become more radical and reactive towards the one part of the society, or we have to remove ourselves completely and become even more independent, like even less emotional than we used to. And we just have to sit down and figure this out, I guess, because I don't have an answer.
And I think before we take the question, I know we have some over there, I think this is also a question as journalism educators we are thinking about as well. So when I went to school, and I'm sure Christiane, when you were here, there was, you learn to be objective, right, quote unquote, and your role is to provide both sides and not to be part of the story. But we increasingly live in a time where it's hard to tell the difference between what is real, what is generated by AI. So where does the journalist fit in now to differentiate between content that's created by a human versus that's machine generated?
Then again, it makes journalism even more relevant than before. The professional journalism, the reliable one, which has a certain mechanisms for the wider society to be checked for being truthful and genuine. So, well, with inventing a new role or kind of understanding the new role of journalism, we also have to add to this new ways to find out what is real, what is not.
And also to make sure that people who are your audience also can understand that this is factual and somebody who is reporting from the ground versus, you know, a stringer or, you know, somebody coming in and helicopter journalism as well. Yeah. So I have lots more questions, but we'll take a question from the audience. So.
Hi. To continue the discussion about objectivity, misinformation is often subjective and filled with bias, as you probably know. How do you keep your photography objective in this age of misinformation?
Thanks. Yeah, that's kind of very naturally continuing what we just spoke. And I guess that's what I keep hearing from some of my colleagues who are frequently discussing this. And there are a lot of voices saying that currently probably objectivity is not possible, but it's not just not possible to be objective, but it's possible to be fair in your coverage. And again, in addressing such complex issues that, for example, that is currently unfolding in Israel and in Gaza, we have to take an example from how the judicial system works with these themes, and it does so. It does not try or it does not attempt to make larger statements or judgments. The court doesn't do that, right? Court takes a case by case and examines separately. Here's the hospital that has been bombed. Let's investigate this specific case. Here's that the hostage has been taken. Let's investigate this specific case. And when the journalism is taking this example and laying out all the information as good as possible with, you know, all the proofs that could be gathered on a way, laid out in front of the public, then we can say we did our job. Doesn't mean it's going to make it easier for society to, it's not going to resolve the conflicts, especially such complex and long-term conflicts, but at least we know that we did our part, because it's very easy to think that we have a responsibility. Well, that's what I feel, but again, probably is just because I feel guilty for not doing more. I feel that journalism could solve all the problems, but it's not. What we do is inform. What we do is inform, and then it's up to society to try to resolve these issues. And there are a lot of institutions which were created specifically to do that with help of journalists as well. So I hope that answers the question.
So, Mstyslav, on that point, so when we talk about visual storytelling or photojournalism, that's what you use the judicial sort of approach, right, to deal with that. So if I can go back to the film, you also made a director's choice, right, to focus on the narrative being about survivors rather than victims. So can you talk a little bit about the process on how you decided to frame the film using that lens? It's a story about resilience, right?
Right. So, yeah, I think it's more of a story of, like, at least for me, and that's what I see when we were actually quite worried when we submitted the film on this for the Sundance Festival. We were quite worried that it's gonna push away the audience. I was so nervous when the first screening happened, and didn't have, like, nobody walked out of the cinema. That was a good sign. And then it suddenly won the audience awards at the Sundance. It was so meaningful because it was the audience awards, right? So it wasn't that hard. People thought it's important. So I kept asking people, what do you see there? It's so painful. And they said, well, you know what? It is very painful, but at the same time, it is very hopeful. Because every time you see someone suffering on the screen, losing a child in a bombing, or losing a home, or just being desperate, there is always someone nearby to support. You're never alone. You don't see people being alone. And that support, that's what, you know, gives the feeling of the resilience. But coming back to the choices, of course, you can't fit everything into 95 minutes. There's so much more. You can't fit everything in a photograph because, anyway, it's limiting space. But what we can do is, and what Mariupol is a symbol, right? It's a symbol of the resilience, of hope, and at the same time of war crimes and destruction that happened in Ukraine when Russia attacked it. So if we could find this balance between telling the stories, but at the same time showing how symbolic they are, and that's where the good editors come. That's where the good, you know, the teamwork is coming, because for one single person, it's kind of hard to find everything and to do everything right.
And that's an important point, right? Because often as a photojournalist, sometimes you work on your own. You are also now required sometimes to edit and post your own work online as well.
Yeah.
Which
the
is
luxury
different.
of people, of five people teams is gone.
Yes.
Like 10 years ago, we would go in the field and there would be 5 people, right? The sound man, the producer, the translator, the driver, the cameraman, the editor. Wow. Now you're alone. You're doing photo, video, text, you name it. You translate, you drive sometimes. But that's the demand of the modern journalism, unfortunately. There is less money, there is more competition. But for the war zones, you definitely need someone who you trust. It's just a matter of survival.
So we'll take the next question.
Hello. Is there a difference in how you approach war photography as opposed to when you are photographing protests?
Photographing what?
Protests.
Excuse me, I haven't...
Protests.
Protests.
Protests. Thanks. Sorry, it was a bit muffled sound. When we say photography, I would say multimedia because, yeah, recent years, it's always mixed. Photography, I was showing you photos, but in fact, it's always a mix. You study how to switch from video to photo all the time. No, not really. Not really. There is a certain specificity to the protests, and I do it in my own way. I tend to get very close. That's what I do. Too close sometimes. There's a club of producers that can't work with me because I'm getting too close during the protests, right? But yeah, there are rules everywhere. But so I don't remember if I mentioned this, but I also asked this videographer who left me in Ukraine. He's my good friend now. I say, how do you decide when you risk your life and not risk your life, right? How do you make this choice? And it was 2014, and he said, Mstyslav, well, if you're just sitting in a trench and one guy is shooting at another guy, I wouldn't risk my life. But if there is a child dying, or if I see that the tanks, Russian tanks, will start rolling through the border of Ukraine, and this will be a symbolic and a historical moment, that is something I would risk my life for. So every time you are trying to make a choice and to understand the context, whether this is something that really needs to be, this is the story that really needs to be told, crucially needs to be told, or it is something that you can just hold back. But again, if you wake up in a basement in Mariupol and bombs are falling and there are people without limbs around you, no painkillers, and what you really want to do is just sit there, never go out. But then you see a doctor, like a nurse, just going up the basement, getting the snow in a bucket, melting the snow and starting wiping the floors. And police comes, brings some food, and doctors are going into surgery rooms, which are in like a separate building, which doesn't have a roof, like a strong roof over it. So if the bomb falls, they're done. They still go there, and you think, oh, well, okay, what do I do? And you go and you shoot. Yeah.
So actually, if I could follow up for our students here, what advice would you have now that you've been doing this type of work? And war journalism is very different from other type of local journalism or even national journalism. What would you tell them if somebody's thinking of going into the type of work that you do?
The first advice, like real practical advice, but seriously.
Yes.
Study languages, at least 4 or 5 languages. You just can't work as an international journalist, as a conflict journalist, if you don't know at least 5 languages. Well, you can, but it will be hard. You can't go completely in the field, and because it's just too risky, you are out of context. You need to do that. And then, think twice, because it's going to destroy your life for sure.
There are also rewards as well.
But there are also rewards. But then again, well,
you could get a Pulitzer.
You could get a Pulitzer, but you never know.
You never know. Yes. So talk about why you do it. Why do you continue to do it?
The thing is that in the modern world, and we spoke about that, and we spoke about that with students before this, something that gets me and makes me really angry is indifference, right? Because in the world that is, it seems for us that it's falling apart. Probably every other generation feels the same, but since we are getting all the information from all the corners of the world, that things are not going so well, the indifference feels like a crime. And whether you are a conflict journalist or you're doing something else, it's a way to participate in that. There were moments. I feel that 10 years ago, there were moments when I could allow myself to be indifferent, where I could allow myself to just close from whatever was happening and just be alone. Don't worry. I can't do it now, not because I became someone different, but because not doing anything while so many horrible things are happening feels like you are helping the criminals to do what they do. So whatever form of art or journalism or cinematography, whether it's literature, whatever form it takes, if it helps to fight this indifference, is incredibly valuable in the modern world. So you don't have to pick conflict journalism to do something. You just have to pick something that inspires people. And I feel when I'm there, I just feel that I'm in the right place. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. And I guess we all looking for this feeling in life. And once we find it, then we just stick to it. And that's what stuck.
And I think Christiane would agree with you. She's been doing it for
Right,
40
yeah,
years.
I'm
right?
sure, yeah.
So
You know that feeling. Also, you know the frustration, right? You know the frustration we all have that we can't change stuff. Like you really want to, but you. You mean in Mariupol, right? Yeah. This is weird. This is so weird. This is another weird thing that happened. How the 500,000, like half million city, half million people city, remains with only 3 journalists working. How is that possible? I have no idea how it happened, really. I remember driving the last journalist out to the evacuation point. He was like, hey man, could you drive me out to evacuation point? I was like, sure, yeah. And then my editor's asking me, hey, Mstyslav, are you leaving? Are you staying? What are you doing? You know, they would trust you, but you know, do you have a plan? I had like 4 plans, none of them worked. But then we came up with another plan that worked. And then there was Mantas Kvedaravičius, a Lithuanian filmmaker that apparently was at the same time with us in Mariupol. And he tried to leave the city and he just got caught on a checkpoint and got executed. So there was one more person that was reporting, and he made his wife from the footage he filmed made a film that's called Mariupolis 2. It's a very different film from my film, but it's really worth seeing as well. I have no idea how it happened, seriously. But it shouldn't be, because when we left, next day the Mariupol Drama Theater got bombed. And then we went through this process of a very hard process of the reconstruction of what happened. How many bombs there were, how many people there were, 3D models, dozens of witnesses, reconstructing the scene with like footage from the phone, but really from really far. And it was because there was no one there.
So it's important to witness the history as well and document what's happening. So we probably have time for maybe a couple more questions.
Sure.
So let's take the next one.
Hello. So this is actually 2 questions, but the first one is, what is it that the average person can do to counter fake news?
Okay, that's great. Nothing. I'm going to explain why. It wasn't a joke. So this actually theme that, again, the topic that we got discussed a lot after Mariupol, during Mariupol, whatever I could get to speak to my editor, and it would look like this. I would run out of the hospital there was like a small park. In the middle of that park, there was a crater from a 120 millimeter shell. And I would sit in that crater, open up the sat phone, and wait for the connection with the satellite. No Starlinks back then. And then I would ask the questions, you know, what's on the news, what's going on? Tell me, because people are going to be asking me. Whenever I go around the city, you know, with a press sign, people would grab me and say, "Hey, so what's the news? What's the news?" And misinterpretation, for that matter, was one of the main topics in our conversations, because misinformation is the wrong word. Misinterpretation is the right word. Probably was as many minutes of the footage of the maternity hospital bombing on the Russian news that it was on the Ukrainian news, on the US news. It was just very different voiceover, right? So it was just interpreted in a different way. And that is something, here's what we can do. We can work with the longer forms, not just 1 minute or 2 minute pieces that just get scrolled through or seen on the news and forgotten. We do documentary films and we give an audience the context. The context in these times of misinterpretation is invaluable. This is actually the only thing you can do. You never engage in a fight with the propaganda, because as soon as you engage in a fight with propaganda, you just drop on their level, and that's what they want. They want you to engage, and if you do engage, you're lost. So what you do is you just continue reporting. That's all. And if you are reporting well, you're reporting enough context and enough follow-ups to stories, then that would, for informed people, will be enough to make their own good judgment.
We can take.
We actually have one more question about being misinterpreted.
Sure.
All the info we get as humans is relative to the point of perspective. Did you have a moment with your photo reporting when you felt your work was completely misinterpreted?
Yeah, so the main technique, well-worked technique of propaganda would be whenever something important happens, like a hospital bombing, for example, to launch as many versions of the event as possible in the media space. So people will get lost in interpretations. They would lose one truth that there was among all other versions. They would say, "Oh, we'll never find out what happened, because there's so many versions and nobody knows what's going on." That's the technique. And yeah, well, last time it happened with basically everything that Mariupol was. It is happening now as film gains its popularity. It will be attacked more and more. But again, here's what's interesting. The videos from maternity hospital bombing and the photos were published almost simultaneously. However, misinterpretation used photos much more than the video, because it's much easier to take photos out of context. Well, then again, it gives you an importance of multi-format reporting and context.
We can take one last question. I know you have one there.
Hello again. How do you balance how much violence to show in your films as to impact the viewer but not desensitize them?
Yeah, this was a very, thanks for the question. It was one of the conversations we constantly had during the editing, the process of editing the film. When you submit materials for AP, they don't get sanitized in any way. Nothing gets cut off because it goes anyway to the channels first with warning, but you still send everything, and then the channels or media organizations choose what they show and what they don't show. When you edit in the film, you have to consider several things. First, you still have to be very, very respectful towards the victims. This is the priority. But at the same time, you have to consider the importance of showing everything, and as you said, not sanitizing. Because here's the danger. As soon as we start sanitizing the footage of the war, which often happens on a TV because it's the age limitations, all valuable reason, all valid reasons. Creates a wrong understanding of the war, and it makes war acceptable in a way for larger audience. They look at it and they say, okay, well, yeah, it's bad. It's not that bad. But I see the media space over the last couple of years have changed. There is much more graphic footage, real footage allowed in general for the public than it was when it was before. I guess that's because there's just more and more and more of this, and you can't really stop it. And I want to just to add on the theme of the indifference. Yeah, again, you have to be careful with adding too much of it, because then we just shut down as viewers. We cannot take anymore, and we stop caring if there is too much. So finding this balance was an important thing. And so coming back to something we discussed today with the students as well, on the indifference, we spoke about the indifference in the countries that tend to move towards authoritarian regimes and totalitarian regimes. There are plenty, unfortunately, in the world right now. And one of the first signs of this in a society is the government's attempt to impose indifference on the society. So what it means is that the first and foremost, what the, let's say, Russian government did to its people throughout this 10 years is to plant the feeling that you can't change anything. To plant this in journalists, in activists, but also in common folk. So the thought that if I go to vote for someone, it wouldn't change anything. The guy will still get reelected. If I protest on the street, it's not going to change anything because my country will still invade the neighboring country. This feeling of powerlessness and indifference is cultivated by an authoritarian, totalitarian governments and its people. So it is very important for democratic societies and for journalists to watch over this tendency. If your government tries to tell you very hard through different mediums that you can't change anything, that means something is going really wrong. And that's what was different about Ukrainians. When the war started, well, the revolution in 2004 happened. Everything seemed fine, but it didn't go so well. Okay, another revolution. And war started. Invasion started in 2014. And then it just got worse in 2022. And all the time, people felt that they can change. If Russia just moved in Ukraine and people will be sitting in their home and saying, "Oh, I can't. Well, what can I do? I'm just a man," right? But that was not the case. The case was, okay, I'm gonna go take a gun. I'm gonna go in a hospital. I'm gonna go and film whatever. So that's an important thing. The indifference is very dangerous because it's also a message to the government that they can do anything.
So to end on a positive note, I want you to talk.
That was a positive note.
That was positive. It was positive, but on a more positive note. This is wonderful. First I am really appreciative that you could make it. I know that I had many calls with Sarah about the possibility of you not being able to come, and an alternate plan that we had, right, to still have you join us. But
yeah, the reason why I'm here, that Special Forces kicked me out from another bank, and they
Oh.
said, look, man, just go to New York, come back in 2 weeks.
Oh, is that what happened?
Yes, they said, okay, here's the boat, go back.
So we're truly glad that you are here. You made this film, but to talk about the theme of not becoming indifferent, and it is very easy to become indifferent because there is so much information. It's overwhelming. It's hard for us to process it. So for our students, and we have many majors in Harrington School, I want you to leave us with a thought on when you pick up your camera and you are reporting live suffering, death, carnage. When you focus on something, what happens to you, and how you decide that this is where I'm going to start, capturing the story?
I think in a way that more you film, more you see, more you see the impact of what you do, less there is chance you can stop. Like I remember after we left Mariupol, and I got a call from New York editors, and they told me, Mstyslav, we will totally understand if you don't want to report anymore. You could just go wherever you want. And I said, how can I not do that? So whatever you do propels you into doing more. So making a difference will motivate you to go forward. And anyone can make a difference, even by just inflicting a conversation, by trying to put ideas together, to express them. You don't necessarily have to be in a field.
That's on a more positive note. So I would like to invite Dean Riley to close now.
Yeah, I'm full of positive things.
Yes, you are.
Just they're not always on the surface. Thank you.
Being here. Is this working? Yeah. There we go. Great. All right. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you for the time that you spent with our students.
It's not working,
That's one of
Jen.
the most. Not working?
Yeah, I think you want to go over there.
So now?
The other one.
There we go. The other one. All right. But does anybody have any sound out here? I'm going to use my teaching voice then. Yes. All right. So this is a great event. I look forward to this event every year because not only is it bringing something to the community about what we do as an institution here, which is educating our students to become the next generation of journalists that we need, but it also brings us together to recognize the importance of journalism, to who we are, to our democracy, and to taking history and making it visible to all of us because we need to see these things. We are fortunate to have Christiane Amanpour as an alum from URI who has endowed this series for us, who comes back and spends her time with us, who works with us every year, in fact, to help us identify the up-and-coming, the people who are out there doing the important work as has happened this year. So we thank her for that. And thank all of you for being here, and for all of those who are out there online. I also appreciate you joining us. I'm going to do one PSA and let you go. I have to write, I can't remember dates anymore. We have another featured Harrington event coming up. It is the Chernov Lecture on First Amendment Rights. It is on November 1st at 5 p.m. It will be in Swan Hall. We will also live stream it for you as we do everything now. We will be joined by Caitlin Dickinson from the Atlantic. She recently won the 2023 Pulitzer Prize. We have a theme going this year on this. Her talk is Digging for Truth. She's going to delve into the essential role of investigative journalism in our society and how research and evidence can serve as a valuable tool. So I hope you join us for that one too. The Chernov series is another